Hey, Rising Church, welcome to session number 5 as we dive into Luke, chapters 13, 14, 15. Hope you guys are doing well. For those of you guys who took a week off, you have some time to make up this week as you have 6 chapters to cover, so hopefully you have a great discussion. I'll try to keep this short if that's possible for me. Hopefully you guys did have fun last week. I saw some people bowling and some people going out to dinner together, so it's really important to you fellowship together and hang out together as a grove. But this week, I just wanted to kind of talk a little bit about the background setting for a lot of what we've been reading this week. As you see Jesus' teaching, as he goes to Jerusalem, you start to see a lot more opposition, and it's coming from the Pharisees. And I think it's interesting if you actually look at all of Luke, how you see Jesus kind of going back and forth between spending time with sinners, with tax collectors. He goes to Levi's house. He goes, this crowds of sinners and tax collectors. He's going to all these different Jewish synagogues. He goes to these Pharisees' homes. They invite him to their homes. And you see Jesus over and over again going into their homes and sharing meals with them and talking with them. We've talked about before how Jesus crosses the lake, the Sea of Galilee, goes to the area of the Gerasenes, which is predominantly Gentile. He goes through Samaria. He just seems to be going to anybody and everybody, and he's willing to hang out with pretty much anybody. And in our reading this week, we see him go to the house of a prominent Pharisee. They kind of look down on him because he keeps hanging out with these tax collectors and sinners. Chapter 15 starts off, now the tax collectors and sinners were all gathering around to listen to Jesus. So it seems to be this opposition between the sinners on one side and the tax collectors, and the Pharisees and the religious people on the other side. And I kind of want to give you a little background on that. If you look at the Bible, actually historically, you look at the history of the Jewish people. We talked about this last week on Sunday morning, how they kind of went astray quite a bit. Obviously, when we talked about how they made sacrificed their sons and daughters in the fire to Baal and to Asherah and to Molech and to these local fertility gods, and that's not something obviously they were supposed to do. And that was coming from the leadership. That was like the leaders, the kings, not just the common people. And so when you look at the history of the Jews, you see that up until basically 500 BC, they were pretty ambivalent, I would say, about God. They were kind of wishy-washy. They kind of just went back and forth between following him and not following him for, 1,000 plus years. And it isn't until after the exile, which in 586 BC, the Babylonians come in and they wipe out the southern kingdom, which is Judah. In 722 BC, before that, the Assyrians had come through and taken out the northern kingdom. And when they returned to the land, they turned about 500-ish BC, all of a sudden the pendulum swings. They go from the time of Josiah, where they literally couldn't even find the book of the law. That was like, they show up to Josiah and he's like, what is this thing? I've never seen it before. And he's the king. To now, when they return, they are super, super, super zealous about the law, about following Moses, about all the Jewish customs, the Jewish laws, making sure they're obeying the Sabbath, making sure that they're eating the right foods. And that's not a bad thing. And so I think it's hard, because when we read now, 2,000 years later, we read about the Pharisees and the teachers of the law, we just automatically think bad guy. And these people are screwed up. They're the religious people, and we kind of look down on them with a negative tone. But really, they're good guys. They're just trying to make sure that the people obey God's law, because they don't want to get sent away again. They don't want to have all this stuff happen again with the Babylonians. They are zealous for their faith and for following the law and for obedience to Moses' commands. And so I don't want you to think of them as bad guys. I want you to think of them as misdirected, because they had put all their eggs into that basket of following the law. And that's why Jesus, when he comes, he keeps going back and forth between the two, because he's like, I want to reach the people that are completely lost on this side, and I want to reach the people that are lost. They're doing good stuff, but they're just misdirected. And Jesus goes after all of them. So he spends time with the Pharisees, even though the Pharisees are really against him a lot. He keeps going into their homes. He keeps, trying to have these conversations with them. He keeps trying to redirect their thoughts to understand that they need a Savior, that they are not self-righteous, that they need a Savior as well. They need the Messiah. And so when you read them, I guess, have a little bit of empathy for them. And because I think Jesus does. And Jesus goes after, again, both the people that are far from him and the people that are close but still misdirected. And I think that's true today. There's a lot of people today that are religiously a little bit off, and Jesus would go after them. But Jesus would also go after those who are completely far off from him and have nothing to do with him. And that's what I love about Jesus. He's continually going after people. And that's what we see in chapter 15 as you guys read that, really focusing on the brother, the older brother, in the parable of the lost son, because I think that relates to a lot of us and maybe our attitude towards the lost. And talk about that in your grows, and talk about what does it look like for us to kind of be between those two spots. We don't want to be the lost, the sinners, but we also don't want to be misdirected, religious Pharisees. How do we be in the middle of all that? So I hope you guys have a great discussion. Hopefully you have a lot of food for thought, and you guys are off to a great start. Have a great week. Bye.